Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, the accused Poway synagogue shooter is arraigned in court.
We want to be clear that this sort of hate and hateful crimes will not be tolerated. And this is why I'm not going to even mention his name.
The San Diego District Attorney lays out charges that could put the accused shooter away for life. And what can law enforcement do to track extremism online? A former FBI agent tells KPBS about the challenges posed by social media.
Mexico has a homicide by firearm epidemic. And one way to help address that epidemic is to address the problem of firearms.
Part 2 of a KPBS special report on the cross-border gun problem. What's being done to stop the flow of U.S. weapons into Mexico?
Thank you, San Diego, for having us out. Very grateful.
And presidential hopeful Beto O'Rourke brings his campaign to San Diego. KPBS Evening Edition starts now. Good evening. It's Tuesday, April 30th. Thanks for joining us. I'm Priya Sridhar. The man accused of shooting 4 people at a synagogue in Poway over the weekend made his first court appearance this afternoon. 1 woman died in the attack. The 19-year-old Rancho Penasquitos resident pleaded not guilty to murder and other counts. Prosecutors are treating the shooting as a hate crime. KPBS reporter Claire Trageser has more on today's arraignment.
I'm here at the San Diego County Superior Courthouse where today we saw the arraignment of John Ernest, the alleged shooter at the Poway Synagogue this Saturday. He's being charged with murder with a special circumstance of a hate crime, as well as 3 additional charges of attempted murder and a charge of arson at a mosque in Escondido last month. He pleaded not guilty to all of the charges, and he remained silent and expressionless during the arraignment. Afterward, District Attorney Summer Steffen said it was clear that his crimes met the legal definition of a hate crime.
As prosecutors, we deal with violence on a daily basis. But when the target of violence is an entire religion, race, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, the victim pool becomes very large.
Steffen also said that she would not say his name during her remarks.
I'm not going to even mention his name. There is only one villain in this case, but there are many heroes.
She said it appeared that he had purchased the gun that he used legally, and she said that she is still deciding whether to pursue the death penalty. Claire Trageser, KPBS News.
There's a common thread between this week's shooting at a synagogue in Poway and the disrupted terror plot in Long Beach. Authorities say the accused used the internet to connect with like-minded extremists. Joining me to discuss this is Daryl Foxworth, a retired FBI special agent with 30 years of experience. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start out with this thwarted plot in Long Beach. The Department of Justice arrested a 26-year-old former U.S. Army soldier who was plotting to detonate improvised explosive devices at a white nationalist rally in Long Beach this weekend. We also heard from the DOJ that on March 2nd, this suspect posted a video online professing his Muslim faith, and he said America needs another Vegas event, obviously referencing the mass shooting that occurred in Las Vegas in October of 2017. It seems like both of these 2 suspects were using chat rooms to talk to other extremists. Are law enforcement monitoring these chat rooms?
Well, first let me say, when you look at both of these cases, they appear to have some similarities. The first thing is that it appears that they're both homegrown violent extremists. And what we're talking about individuals who are self-radicalized through the internet. And the problem with these cases, when you talk about these individuals, is that they're very hard to detect. You don't know when they're going to go out and connect or commit that violent act.
And so even though these suspects aren't necessarily being tied to an organized group, they are using chat rooms. And in many cases, these chat rooms seem to be very popular with that kind of ideology. Is there a list of those kinds of chat rooms that federal agents are sort of surveying?
If there's a legal basis and they have lawful authority to go in and monitor, certain communications, then in connection with an investigation, then that's something that they consider, and that's something that they would do.
I mean, what can be done if people are actually making threats online? Is it actually a crime, or could people just claim that, hey, this is freedom of speech? And how do you know when a threat that's made online is actually a credible threat?
Yes, we always have to be aware of the civil liberties, and we have to be aware of freedom of speech. Sometimes we don't like what people are saying. You may not like it, I may not like it, but the thing is, that may be covered under freedom of speech. Where it crosses the line is when you start talking about doing specific actions with that, going out and doing something.
How much of this is being handled at the federal level, and how much communication is there between federal, state, and local authorities? We saw over the weekend this incident that happened in Poway. That's under the jurisdiction of the San Diego Sheriff's Department. Do those kinds of departments even have the resources to be monitoring extremist chat rooms, or are they relying on their federal partners?
I served for over 30 years and worked in a number of field offices in a number of different cities. And I can tell you that local law enforcement, they know their streets, they're out there conducting patrols, they know the neighborhoods, they know the communities. So they have that expertise locally, and it can't be undervalued. Federal resources come in. There's technology, there's resources that the FBI and other federal agencies may bring in, and you bring that together in this task force setting, and you maximize your efforts.
Well, Daryl Foxworth, I appreciate your insight into some of these questions.
Well, thank you for having me.
And you can find all of our coverage of the Poway synagogue shooting at kpbs.org. It includes our conversation on Midday Edition on the national rise in anti-Semitic attacks. President Trump continues to demand a wall to stop immigrants and drugs from entering the U.S. Last night, we looked at how Mexico's record violence is tied to U.S. guns pouring south into Mexico. Now, KPBS border reporter Jean Guerrero looks at what's being done about it.
Matt Clear runs an active shooter defense school in San Diego. He was in the military for 12 years and worked 8 years as a police officer.
Guns in Mexico are just like drugs in America, okay? They're freely flowing across that border. That's completely unprotected, and I don't want to get on the wall subject, but basically we need something.
Clear says he doesn't think making U.S. gun laws more restrictive is a solution to stopping the smuggling of guns into Mexico. He says that only creates problems for law-abiding gun owners like him.
So the laws are so convoluted and ever-evolving that I can just be sitting at home doing nothing, and if I'm not going down to my gun store every day asking if there's a new law, I can immediately become a felon.
It's against Mexican law to take U.S. guns into Mexico. But Tijuana's police department says nearly all of the 2,000 weapons it has seized in crime scenes over the last 3 years are from the U.S. They pour in through ports of entry, where there are few inspections. The reality is affecting real people.
And here he is.
Julieta Sanchez shows me a picture of her 29-year-old son, Fernando, who was fatally shot in Tijuana.
They shot him one time in the temple. They shot him right here. You can see in the photo. And then he died.
Sanchez is a U.S. permanent resident in San Diego. She says the problem with her son started when he began to struggle with drug addiction in the U.S.
I wanted to rehabilitate him, but it's too expensive to do it here.
He was killed in Tijuana after she sent him there to be treated. David Shirk is a researcher with the Justice in Mexico Project, who says lax U.S. gun laws are contributing to Mexico's violence hitting an all-time high last year.
Mexico has a homicide by firearm epidemic, and one way to help address that epidemic is to address the problem of firearms.
He says American gun lobbyists have blocked legislation to fix the problem because they profit off the black market in Mexico.
Well, one thing that could be really helpful, which we do not do in the United States, is to register firearms and to track firearms. It's actually illegal in the United States for the ATF to maintain records of who has a gun in the United States.
Shirk also says the southbound smuggling of U.S. guns is contributing to the current border crisis.
Many of those firearms that are contributing to the fear and insecurity that leads people to flee their homes from Central America and come to the U.S. border seeking asylum are U.S. Purchased or manufactured firearms that are making their way into the black market downstream throughout the Americas.
But gun shop owners like Lee Moisev of Gunfighter Tactical says gun law restrictions just hurt his business without doing much else. He says gun shops do plenty to keep weapons out of the hands of criminals. He remembers a man who stopped by once.
He said out loud, I want to buy that rifle to take back to my ranch in Mexico. And we said, no, you can't do that. You cannot do that. There's laws against that, and I'm not going to sell you a gun now.
Some people think Mexico would be safer if its government made it easier for citizens to buy guns, like in the U.S. Currently, Mexican gun laws are extremely restrictive. Bob Maupin is a self-described vigilante in East County. He says Mexico's problems of violence stem from its restrictive gun laws.
I would like to see the Mexican people be armed so they could take their government back, take their country back.
The head of Mexico's customs agency, Ricardo Peralta, says the new administration is installing X-rays and other surveillance technologies at the ports to capture more information about vehicles coming in from the U.S. Previously, there were very few inspections of southbound vehicles.
If in the past they had used technology like we're using now and which we're planning to expand, we would have avoided so many deaths in Mexico.
He says many people have pushed back against southbound inspections because it means slowdowns to enter Mexico, like the long wait times experienced to enter the U.S.
Of course there's resistance. People think Mexico has no intention to take care of its border.
Clear of the active shooter training school says he has another solution.
I'll tell you right now, here's the answer. Hey, America, stop doing illegal drugs. That's it. That's your answer. Every drug addict out there, quit. Stop buying illegal drugs.
And he says that will stop the violence in Mexico. Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
And you can watch part 1 of Jean Guerrero's report on our website, kpbs.org. Well, border issues were a focus for Beto O'Rourke during a presidential campaign stop today in San Diego. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen says the Democrat also focused on climate change.
Muy buenos días.
O'Rourke opened with brief remarks in Spanish and throughout the event touted his border city origins in El Paso.
We have a lot in common in our two communities.
San Diego is safer than the average city in the interior, he said, because its diversity teaches people to treat one another with dignity and respect.
And that is what has made us safer. Not walls, not putting kids in cages, not sending 5,500 members of the United States military to a border at one of its safest moments in the history of the U.S.-Mexico border.
Just yesterday, O'Rourke released a detailed plan to tackle climate change, a $5 trillion proposal that includes big investments in renewable energy, mass transit, and infrastructure to withstand extreme weather events. He told the crowd of several hundred that climate change cannot be addressed by half measures.
We must be known by our ambitions, our aspirations, the work, the service, the sacrifice that we will employ in order to achieve them.
O'Rourke is one of more than 20 Democrats seeking the party's nomination for president.
I really liked him.
Gloria Vargas of Santee says while she hasn't made up her mind, O'Rourke came across as personable and real.
When I came in, I was a little bit skeptical, but now I think he's a pretty good guy. I would say he's probably up at the top 3.
San Diego might expect more campaign stops from Democrats. With California's primary moved up to March 2020, the state's voters matter more now than they have in the past.
Thank you for having us out, San Diego.
Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, a decisive day in Venezuela. Opposition leader Juan Guaido claims to have military support in his push to oust President Nicolas Maduro. Coming up at 7 on KPBS.
Lawmakers are trying again to pass a bill that will restrict how renters can be evicted from their homes. The bill would only allow just cause evictions for reasons like missing payments or illegal activity. An assembly committee passed the bill today, but last year a similar bill failed. San Diego already has a just cause eviction ordinance. This bill would impose similar rules statewide. Transportation planners suggest major changes might be needed to the way we get around. But as environmental reporter Eric Anderson tells us, lawmakers want to preserve funding for freeway expansion.
San Diego County supervisors voted 3-2 to draft a letter to the San Diego Association of Governments asking the planners to stay on course when it comes to funding local transportation projects. Board Chair Diane Jacob joined Jim Desmond and Kristen Gaspar in asking SANDAG to keep funding for more than a dozen highway expansion projects. Those projects were spelled out in a voter-approved transportation initiative that's been in place for 11 years. Jacob says her East County constituents need better roads.
There's not going to be any mass transit available to people that live in these areas, whether it's Julian, Ramona, Lakeside, Alpine, Hamul, Potrero, Campo, Boulevard, any of these areas.
Nathan Fletcher and Greg Cox declined to support writing the letter. Fletcher called the measure a step backward for a county that needs to be looking forward. Cox called the letter premature because SANDAG hasn't finalized its regional plan, which puts a focus on technology and mass transit projects.
I don't have a problem supporting highway and road projects, but I also want to see the next regional transportation plan include funding for commuter rail, for light rail, for rapid buses, for pedestrian amenities, and for bikeway projects.
The Board of Supervisors vote is just a recommendation to preserve funding for highways in that Transnet measure. But the final decision will be made by SANDAG after they say they have a period of public input. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
Every day, thousands of school buses pump diesel fumes into California's air, but a plan to replace them with lower emission vehicles is on hold. Capital Public Radio's Ezra David Romero has an update from Sacramento.
There are very few electric school buses in the state, and diesel school buses emit around 5.3 million tons of greenhouse gases every year nationally. San Francisco Assemblyman David Chu's bill to help begin to phase them out was recently tabled until 2020 for revision. Chu's reason for authoring the bill is personal.
As someone who's a father of a 3-year-old, I am not looking forward to a day when he might have to get onto a school bus that is spewing dirty fumes into his chest.
The now 2-year bill would create a path for school districts to work with utilities and state agencies to figure out how to finance the transition. Even though the legislation is on hold, the California Energy Commission reported last year there's more than $90 million in funds available for replacing polluting buses. In Sacramento, I'm Ezra David Romero.
A city with the imagination to connect the Olympic and Paralympic Games to the future.
Hosting the Summer Olympics in LA will cost a bit more than expected. LA 2028, the private committee organizing the event, now says the anticipated budget will be $6.9 billion. $5.3 billion was the original estimate. Organizers say sponsorships, TV rights, and other outside funding will pay for the Olympics. The city of Los Angeles will not spend any public dollars. The ancient European festival known as Witches' Night takes place April 30th to May 1st. Comic-Con Museum is hosting a 2-night event to explore witches in history and pop culture. KPBS cinema junkie Beth Accomando is part of tonight's event and joins us now from Balboa Park. Beth?
Yeah, we're here at the Comic-Con Museum, and I'm here with Keegan Chetwind, who is the Director of Public Programs here. So Comic-Con Museum is not officially open, but you are staging events here on a regular basis. What's the importance of having events like this, celebrating Witches' Night and looking at it in history?
Beth, these events are actually really helpful to us as a way to kind of test out the kinds of programs and things that we'll ultimately do at the Comic-Con Museum once it opens. And the opportunities that arise like this one allow us to kind of use pop culture as an interesting tool to connect people to education. So we're really excited to be able to kind of have this program detailing witches in pop culture tonight.
And one of the people who are going to be helping us look at witches in pop culture is San Diego State University professor Elizabeth Pollard. And you are going to be tonight you're giving a lecture. Tomorrow you're going to be screening The Witch and having a discussion. So what is this lecture going to look at in terms of witches in pop culture?
What I hope to do with the lecture tonight is to talk about the deep, long historical roots of witchcraft in popular culture, going back to the Roman period, the 1st century CE, and tracing it over the last 2 millennia, ending up with the movie The Witch.
Now, at San Diego State, you have an interesting piece of history that you get to work with and look at. This is a book from the 15th century, and Amanda Lanthorn is with the University Archives. So tell us a little bit about where this book comes from and what period of time it's from.
Sure. So this is our early printing of the Malleus Maleficarum. It was printed in 1494 by Anton Koberger in Nuremberg, Germany. So the Malleus Maleficarum is one of the most infamous witch hunting treatises.
So this is a book that people who were hunting witches or persecuting people who they thought were witches would use. And one of the things that's interesting is what's in the margins of these books. Talk about this.
Correct. One of the fascinating things about this book is that it was a book that someone used. They annotated it. In fact, multiple people annotated this book over the centuries. And so if you look at the text, you can see handwriting, and I got permission to touch it, handwriting here in the margins, as well as marking lines along the edges, pointing to important points. Someone took a red ink and wrote casus, 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 pointing to various cases in the text. And one of the fascinating things about this text are what are called manicula, pointing hands, pointing to the portions of the text that have something interesting. So we have a maniculum right here. Speaking of the maniculum, it reminds me, this is an incunabulum, right, Amanda? Yes. Do you want to tell people what that is?
Sure. So an incunable is an early printed book that dates between 1450 and 1501. I don't know why the 01, but it's 1450 and 1501.
So it comes from the cradle of printing. So printing began in the West around 1450, and this text comes within roughly the first generation of printed texts. So we have a printed text, printed in Latin, this Hammer of Witches, with handwritten notes along the margins.
Great. So tonight is going to be the lecture, which is an illustrated lecture by Elizabeth Pollard looking at witches in pop culture through literature and historical documents and film. And tomorrow night we're going to continue this, and there's going to be a screening of The Witch. So this is all happening here at the Comic-Con Museum. It's down in Balboa Park. Not officially open, but you can come down and check out these events. I'm Beth Accomando, and I'm here in Comic-Con Museum.
Thank you so much for that report, Beth. Well, more rain fell in San Diego this morning, but now a dry pattern is moving in. Erin Calandra has details in tonight's forecast.
Well, today is certainly a prettier day than it was yesterday. That storm that brought us those showers, clouds, and even those storms is now off into the Rockies, and we are seeing improving conditions. Nothing on the satellite. It's going to remain quiet tonight in the metro, 59 degrees. Clouds are building. You'll notice them in the morning, but by the afternoon, breaking up for some sunshine. San Diego at 59, Chula Vista 56 degrees, and in Borrego Springs 57 for that low tonight. Tomorrow, it's going to be nice. The jet stream to the north of us, leaving us wide open for very beautiful conditions. It's going to be seasonable around here with sunshine, so enjoy that. Oceanside at 68 degrees, El Cajon at 74, and Borrego Springs 87 with sunshine. Notice late week, not much change here. It's going to remain just beautiful. Dry, pleasant, sunshine, temperatures mostly in the 70s. Here we are along the coast. We peak at 70 degrees on Friday. The rest of the week will be in the 60s. Inland, we're going to be in the 70s all week long with plenty of sun. In the deserts, we are in the 90s Thursday through Saturday. Make sure you're drinking water, taking breaks to cool down. And in the mountains, a very cool 60s throughout this week with beautiful sunshine to enjoy. For KPBS News, I'm Erin Calandra. Back to you.
And here's a recap of tonight's top stories. The accused Poway synagogue shooter has pleaded not guilty. The plea was entered during the 19-year-old man's arraignment this afternoon. He faces murder, attempted murder, and other charges with a hate crime distinction. His next court appearance is set for May 30th. Beto O'Rourke is the latest Democratic presidential candidate to make a stop in San Diego. He spoke to a crowd of supporters at the Jacobs Center in Chollas View. The former Texas congressman has made several stops in California in recent days. A bill that would only allow just cause evictions is advancing in the state legislature. It passed its committee today. Evictions would only be allowed for things like missed rent payments or illegal activity. San Diego already has a just cause eviction ordinance. This bill would impose similar rules statewide. And here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. On Morning Edition, a moneymaker in the Midway District, how the city is trying to maximize the earning potential of Pechanga Arena. And on Midday Edition, the number of unsheltered people has decreased in San Diego. Midday Edition talks with City Council member Chris Ward about the reasons why. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thank you for joining us and have a great evening.